You know, as she said, I'm Jesse. I teach at Garfield High School. And a lot of, I just want to talk about what these artists have meant to me very, very quickly before we get into this powerful new book. And, you know, Gabriel, you heard a little bit about his resume, but to me, his bringing together of hip hop and activism changed my life this year, right? You know what I mean? So it was like I gave the final speech at the Martin Luther King Day rally this year downtown, and within a few minutes of giving that speech, we were marching just a little bit farther, and it was actually my son's birthday party. He was turning 2. And so I knew that this was not the day I was going to get arrested. I've done that. We'll do it again, but not that day because I had to get to my son's birthday party. So the cops set up a barricade in the street and said, "You're not marching any further." And I said, "Yep, today I'm not." And so I got off the street, got onto the corner, calling my mom to get a ride to the birthday party, and the cops pepper sprayed me in the face without provocation. And I thought, you know, it was a horrible day. My kids are, I show up to the birthday party pouring milk in my eyes, you know, and they're freaked out, you know, and it pretty hard day. And I thought, well, that's just what comes with being an activist. There's nothing I can do about this. And then Gabe calls me, and he was recording his music video for the new single you just dropped on the album. And turns out we have high definition footage up close of everything that happened. To me, that's the ultimate in coming together of hip hop and social movements and political activism. And it, like 40 million hits later, the Seattle Police Department is in a little bit of a hot seat on that issue. So thank you, Gabe, for that. Right?
Thanks to the person that
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man. We got a lot to fight and change. And I mean, every demonstration I go to in Seattle, Gio's there, you know, from the mass immigrant rights demonstrations that we filled the streets with, to the anti-war stuff, and like every movement that I've been a part of, Gio has been there, and not only the soundtrack to the inspiration, but down in the streets with us marching. And, you know, we just kept crossing paths. Like I'd give a talk somewhere and I hear you were coming the next day, and I just always wanted to meet him. And then I'm at my son's auction for his preschool, and we're all, you know, jamming up on stage for the parent band that's raising money for the auction. And then, you know, I'm playing harmonica. I play harmonica and blues around a little bit, and then Gio comes up on stage and starts rapping, you know, for this band. It's just like, yes, this is how I want to meet Gio. So that worked out, and that was just a beautiful connection that our kids are going to preschool at one of the best play-based preschools that rejects standardized testing. You know what I mean? So that's wonderful. And then just to say, Boots. So I first started teaching in Washington, D.C. I moved there in 2001 and began teaching in Southeast D.C. And it wasn't long before I began in the classroom that we saw the smoke rising from the Pentagon after the 9/11 attacks. And that was a really, really, really bad time and a bad place to be somebody with a social, political consciousness that's trying to change the world. You know, if any place in the country, when you bomb the Pentagon, the state is going to react. And there were tanks rolling down the streets of our neighborhood. Everybody had the American flag up. You couldn't say anything critical. But the worst part about it was we had a mass anti-globalization demonstration planned. It was supposed to be the biggest one the world had ever seen yet. And that stuff popped off here in Seattle. during the WTO protest. The only problem for me, I was at college in Minnesota, and there was a bus coming back for the protest, and it filled up, and I didn't get a seat, and I didn't get to come back for it. So this was going to be my moment where, like, all my friends who had talked about the WTO protests and how cool it was and what they did, I was going to be in the biggest one. Then 9/11 happens, and they cancel the protests, and they said, we can't, we have to have support of our government and pull together in this hard time for our country. I'm like, man, so we just give up on the goals of fighting against corporate greed and globalization? And it was the most low, demoralized place I've ever been with political consciousness. And that's when Party Music came out. And without that album, to be like, I'm not crazy. There's somebody else who's not just like rejecting the flag, but like just, you lazy motherfuckers. Like, all the pork and beef, like all just saying it how it needed to be said, it like brought me back. And that's when I became an activist, like wanted to join an organization, wanted to be a socialist. Like it was right after that album that I became an activist and got on the path that I'm on. So that was not just, all the other titles that they read about you. Also, how about Resurrector? I think for me it was like a political resurrection. So I appreciate that. And all the talents you guys bring to the movement have helped keep me in it. So thank you all. So let me just say real quick how I was thinking about this work and then kick off with a question. So I just thought we'd have a free-flowing discussion here with the four of us, and then open it up for a short Q&A session, and then have time to sign some books at the end, if that's cool with everybody. And I have some questions ready and prepared that I'm interested to know from you guys, but if anybody has questions for each other up here, or other directions you want to take the conversation, we should do it. But I thought I'd just kick off by saying that it looks like all of you all are in a really good creative space right now. Like, it's wonderful to see great artists who are also like in the groove, because there's a lot of great artists that I'm like, dang, where have they been? Like, I'm waiting for you to do something. Like D'Angelo seemed like it took forever, And it's like you're not always in the right space to create. So, if you could talk just about like what it means to be in that space right now, what the main projects you guys are working on or excited about, and maybe even like how you get in that space, or what sustains you to be in that place right now, before we get into some other political questions. So I know you got the movie Boots screenplay that you're working on. Geo has this incredible restaurant that if you haven't been to Food and Shit, get it done. The pop-up is where it's at. My wife was just there and said it was way too packed out. So franchising and, and I know you're writing, you got a new album out, Gabriel. So talking about some of that work would be great.
So I really don't have too many viable job skills. So it forces me to have to make art. And no, I put myself in this position where, early on, that was how this is just the economic side of it. That's how I was making my art. Maybe if we had sold 1 million records and I had enough money to get by, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna wait till it hits me, until, I get this inspiration. I'm gonna, there are people that like you said, they're working on their album for 15 years. Right. I have to be, there's a economic side of it. I need to tour, and I don't want people to be bored with the songs, so I'm gonna make new songs. And with that, so that's obviously there's other things that go into it. I like creating. I like, putting ideas out in new ways, and I get bored hearing myself saying the same things. So I think about things more and look for ways to do that. And even then, you get into that creative space, or for me, and I want to do something new with form as well, because I get bored with what I'm doing, and I know that if I'm bored with it, then it's not going to feel passionate. It's not going to be out there. It's interesting. With early on, I learned like certain keys and certain tricks to writing, and you can even see that in literature. Like, recently I had the opportunity to hang out with Arundhati Roy and listen to her talk shit about Salman Rushdie. And she was just like, her critique is similar to some of my critique of a lot of what hip hop is, even like supposedly the real hardcore stuff. It's all the tricks, and it's all the things that make that make it seem like you're clever, right? And with what's considered lyricism, a lot of it is that, like, I'm clever, look at how I use this word and stuff like that. And I definitely did that a lot. But it starts being very limiting to me. And it ends up being like having a job. Like, so sometimes I get asked to do features on other people's stuff or something like that, and I know what they want. I know what their listeners want, and I can do that. But it doesn't feel like I'm really commenting on things. It feels like I'm looking for cute ways to say things. So I started figuring out ways to expand on that and trying to figure out ways to make it feel real, and and make it feel like I'm commenting on what's really going on in my head and what my emotions are. And that became going away from some of those tools. Of course, I don't want to make something abstract, so I'm using some of the tools that people are used to let them hear what's going on. But so going from that, then I, got more and more into conceptualizing things and trying to make it bigger. And last year we did this 78-person performance called the Cool Shadow Box, which was like 3 stages or 5 stages in one room with several bands cooperating and playing at the same time. And there's a lyric on You Are Not a Riot that says, you are a sitcom based on a torture chamber. So we go from that to a sitcom based on a torture chamber. And then, there's all puppet show, different things like that. And so I'm trying to, and so I'm hoping that by keeping myself excited about creating, then, I'm pushing something and getting people excited about life and about engaging in life and about engaging in the world. So that pushes to where, we are with this movie, which is, it's music, it started out as me figuring, not being excited about writing another album, so I wrote a movie, and then, to then write music based on, and I didn't know if it was going to be ever made or anything like that, because it's pretty far out there. But it got published in McSweeney's as its own paperback book earlier this year. And then Sundance brought me to the labs, and we're gonna film it next year. So yeah. So it's a surreal dark comedy with magical realism and science fiction inspired by my time as a telemarketer. It's called Sorry to Bother You. There's monsters in it and stuff. The lead effects engineer from Beasts of the Southern Wild, he's helping me make the monsters. Guillermo del Toro is consulting on some of the stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to go see it. So.
Yeah. David Cross and Patton Oswalt are involved with it.
Nice.
So yeah, so that the thing that pushes me is necessity to do it. You know, like it needs to happen. And you know, I'm saying it as it might sound as if I'm downplaying the artistic need to create. But I think all of that stuff is very much a part of everything. I mean, if I had to work 12 hours a day doing something else, I might not have time, or even I might not even have the will to do it anymore. So, you know, that I'm privileged that I was in a city at a particular time. Well, MC Hammer is why I'm able to do this, because of MC Hammer, and to a lesser extent Digital Underground, every label had to have a group from Oakland. And you know, and they didn't listen to it. They were just like, "You got a group from Oakland?" You know. You know, and they just, okay, cool. So we were in the right place at the right time, and it gave me a little space to create. Yeah.
Can I say something to the crowd? There's hella people in the back. There's like 10 seats right up front. Even if you don't want to sit, it'll make it easier for somebody behind you to see. You know?
Yeah, real.
There's seats over there too.
Oh, yeah.
Can't help it, man.
Come to the front, come to the front.
It's like that back of the bus thing too, when people like just want to sit at the front of the bus. Same thing.
Yes, spread the love, spread the love. Man, I don't know how to follow all that. But I can echo that. I can echo that sentiment of not wanting to be stuck in the same place creatively, trying to keep it fresh. And I guess that's why it's taken so long in between albums. I take typically 3 to 4 years between each full-length record, but in between there's always EPs and side projects. And I'm in the middle of that right now. It's been 4 years since the last full-length record that I dropped with Blue Scholars. And Sabzi's down in LA right now, so he still comes back and visits. I still visit him, and we keep in touch and talk about all our ideas. But we're kind of in that place where we both, in between albums, always need to do something that we can wake up and not feel like, oh man, we got to do this same thing that we did the last 300 days in a row, so that we can do that thing 300 days in a row later on and not feel like obligated to it or anchored to it, and that it's fresh and exciting. On a personal note, it's been dope to be back in this space, physically, like literally this space. Because since that last album dropped, I went back to UW to finish up my undergrad degree, which took me 13 years to finish up. Yeah, I found out tuition is 4 times as much as it was when I dropped out, but that was cool. And then in the meantime, with my partner, my wife, Shara, who's here somewhere, we started this project. You know, our love for food and community. We channeled all that energy into doing this pop-up thing where we still get to, you know, it's on Beacon Hill. Beacon Hill, where you at? Beacon Hill? Yeah. At Inez, at our favorite Filipino restaurant on Beacon Hill. It's kind of full circle too, because Uncle Ernie, who owns Inez, also owned the first restaurant that we did the first Blue Scholars album release party at back in 2004. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the first Blue Scholars album release party was in a Filipino restaurant, and there was lumpia everywhere. And yeah. Anyway, it's crazy just being able and being blessed. Right place, right time. You know, this community is very nurturing. On one hand, there's, you know, you see the Seattle that gets portrayed as like super literate and diverse and all that, and Yeah, that's there. It's there, but it's also a city that's in progress and that's trying to build bridges where there aren't none, and it's still very much divided. And I think a lot of us are up to meet that challenge, and so I'm just blessed to be in a city that's open to these conversations and in a time and place where there's a lot of peers where I look across, and it didn't take too long for us from Gabe and I to see eye to eye and start working together. And then go our separate ways, do our own thing, come back together and share our stories with each other. So I'm still in that mode right now. It's still writing. I just put out an EP with my I just put out an EP. I'm also part of Beat Rock Music with Bamboo, who is from LA by way of Oakland currently, and we just put out an EP called Son of Barcata, and we did a short tour, and we got some videos, and more music, even more music coming. And I see the Party Worker shirts. Yes, those 2 Party Worker shirts. Wow, yes. Yes, always. And yeah, still writing, still doing the food thing, and just kind of keeping it fresh. Oh, also, shout out to Professor Rod from University of Hawaii, who's in the building visiting. We are also, can I tell him? Am I allowed to tell him? All right. We're working on a book together, and it'll feature my photography over the years of, you're in a bunch of them. Yeah, you are. We do. This is new. We just talked about it today.
Okay.
So I'll catch you up. We'll meet at the station or something. Through my lens and the people around me's lens, such as Gabe and people who I'm going to pull now that it's in stone, voices and using my photography and time in the scene to tell a story from neighborhood to neighborhood of the Seattle hip hop scene.
What was the question again? What keeps us creating?
Yeah, and like, what are you creating right now, and
Okay.
how do you get there?
Yeah, so what keeps me creating now is the same thing that's always kept me creating. And I'm gonna quote one of my favorite filmmakers right now, Haile Garima. He said he creates films just to create the story that he hungers to hear. It's the same way for me when it comes to music, when it comes to prose, which I'm doing a lot more of. It's just telling the story that I hunger to hear. I hunger to hear it because it's not being told anywhere else. And if I hunger to hear it, I'm sure there's other people that hunger to hear the same thing, even if I don't know them. And that's something that's always proven true for me. Yeah, so it's just that. I released 2 albums last year, Children of the Dragon, which also was influenced by Haile Garima, and Evidence of Things Not Seen, which was an album that came out wrapped in a book of lyrics. I got to give you a copy because it reminds me of your book, just a tiny version. And aside from that, yeah, I put out, I'm featured in an anthology called Octavia's Brood, radical science fiction stories from social justice movements. It's my first sci-fi story. Won't be my last. I had a blast writing it, and we're doing an event for that here in Seattle next Wednesday at the Downtown Library. It's free. Also doing an event at the University of Hawaii in September. I'll be there. So yeah, just doing that, still writing stories, because I have to. I'd literally go crazy without it. Yeah, that's what it is.
Cool, man. You guys having fun already? Me too. And Boots promised we'd have fun tonight. In that, did you guys read the daily interview with Boots before? I know what. I wrote down this quote from the UW interview that was in the Daily yesterday. They asked him, "What can you expect tonight?" And Boots said, "We can it's not going to be crazy. No one's going to be getting up on the tables and getting naked or anything like that, but it's going to be fun." I think that's proving to be true. And which is a good thing, because we need some fun in this city, in a city that's dominated by Amazon. And you guys saw that. You guys saw the expose that came out about how, like, this woman who works for Amazon, she had a stillborn baby, and they sent her an email saying, we are going to be monitoring you to make sure you're still productive at the workforce, right? I mean, it's just unbelievably atrocious work environment and that's the white collar section of Amazon that is treating workers like that. You can imagine what the warehouses look like here in Seattle. Then these are the conditions and the gentrification and the corporate assault on personhood that's happening here in Seattle. So we need a bit of fun and nights like this to speak back. What I wanted to find out from you guys, and then if you have other things. Oh, go ahead.
Before we move on, there's somebody in the audience that's very creative. That last question would be a good thing to ask. Kimya Dawson.
Yeah.
And she just sent me a song that she made, or she sent everybody a song that she made about Black Lives Matter. And she's a very prolific artist, as people know. And it would be good to hear her answer to that last question.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Shit, man. I just came to hear these guys talk.
Right on.
Yeah, for me, it's weird because I just put this song out online 2 days ago, and I've been writing it for 5 years. And normally I always say, it feels like a hole opens in the top of my head and just like the stuff comes through it. And that's the only way I know how to process the stuff that's happening in the world. And so I've been haunted by these ideas. You know, it started as a song about stop and frisk, and just kept going and going and going. And I was like, it could keep going forever. And so, but yeah, it's like, it's like 7 minutes, yeah, 7. It's not my longest, But, yeah, the first show that I ever played with my old band, the Moldy Peaches, was the weekend after I got out of rehab. And it was a dual diagnosis, for mental illness and addiction. And I had always written, but I had never performed, and I didn't play instruments, and found this 12-year-old kid who played guitar who was like, I'll make some chords for your words. And I was like, okay. And then we had the show in some house, you know, and I had the shakes still. And then I played a song about feeling like awkward and not cool, and some girl came up to me afterwards and was like, I didn't know anybody else felt like that in the way that you put it. And I was like, I didn't either. You know, and it was just that moment of being like, oh shit, there's these feelings that I have that make me crawl into a little hole, and other people are having those same feelings, you know, like what you were saying. And then just sort of realizing that is sort of what heals me and gets me from day to day, you know, and I have to write. You know, it's like, I have to write. Like, I don't try to write. It just possesses me, you know, and yeah, it feels good to have this one out in the world now because it's been in here for so long that I've just been like curled up in this dark. People are like, hey, when you like, I did a collaborative album with Aesop Rock. We have a group called The Uncluded, and so we did that, but it's been a few years since I've had a solo album, and everybody's like, what are you working on? And I'm like, well, there's just one song. It's in here, you know, but it just like, I couldn't, you know, because shit keeps happening and happening and happening, you know. I saw you at the MLK rally. I was like right up there, just like, who the fuck is this guy? You know, I came up from Olympia for it and saw you, and then was just super inspired by what's happening up here. I used to work at Stevens Elementary School in 97 in the before and after school program. And then I've been back in Olympia, and then just my daughter and I moved up here in June, and got her into a diverse school that I'm super psyched about. And my plan is that she will be one of your students.
good.
So, yeah.
That'll be fun. Oh, thank you. Thank you. We need another stool up here, but no, I'm glad you did that. Yeah. Thank you for coming. If there's another moment you want to jump in, just come on up. So let me just ask this before we get into some political topics today that I want to know your guys' opinion on. But I also want to know, like, I'm a fan of origin stories, like the best Wolverine movie is the first one where you find out like how he got his powers. You know what I mean? And so with the origin story, like both, where did you get? How did the politics come together? And then also like, when did you realize that hip hop could be? When did you realize that hip hop could be part of the arsenal of fighting back and resistance? So
in high school, for me, like, rapping wasn't something that you could do to have a career or even make a record, because back then, I don't think even people in the 80s, it felt like nobody knew where Oakland was. Anyway, I'd go to visit my family in North Carolina and say Oakland. They'd be like, you mean Oklahoma? So, like, we always had this very small town. People would lie and say they were from San Francisco or something like that. That would never happen now. But, and so we used to rap, beating on tables and stuff, and it was just something for fun. And I think I had like some Schoolie D raps that I knew nobody else knew was Schoolie D raps, and I would say those. Yeah, and but later on, then I had a friend that I had a friend named Johnny, and I was trying to get him to come to. I was an organizer, and I was trying to get him to come to like police brutality rallies and things like that. And when I say rallies, in the 80s, police brutality rallies were like 8 people, something like that. We'd be like, we had a victory, we got to sum this up as that, 8 people. And, but so I'd be like, you come to the rally and you can get on the mic and you can rap, and that was just my way to make it be 9 people at the rally. And he'd be like, well, I'm only gonna do it if you're my hype man. And so that was how I started, rapping at all. And later on, to back it before that, before I became an organizer, I had always wanted to, like, I want to be on TV. It was part of that same sort of small town. Nobody knows who you are. What are you going to do with your life? But people on TV are important, right? So you want to be on, I want to be on TV. I want to be Prince. I want to, something like that. But I didn't want to practice any instruments or things like that. And then when I became an organizer, I looked down on that earlier feeling as being something that was just individualistic and, a symptom of the society that we're in. To a certain extent, that's true, but what I realize now is that it was the same feeling, which was you want your life to mean something. When you become an organizer, you realize that your life can mean something. And it's part of the same yearning that people have. You want to engage with the world. And so I was doing this with Johnny just so he would come to the rallies and all that kind of stuff. And I think he moved away or something. And later on we were doing, I was about 19, and we were doing, I was in this organization that was pretty insular called the International Committee Against Racism. It was part of Progressive Labor Party. And we would do things like go to neighborhoods and get people to join so they can fight racism, and whatever that means, buy the newspaper and fight racism. And so one of the things we would do was go to Double Rock projects every, we go to Double Rock projects like every Sunday or Saturday or something like that. And we'd sell the paper, we'd talk to people. Later on, we'd get together and have a meeting and talk about the individual conversations that we had with each person and how close they are to maybe joining the organization. That's how slow the work was. But anyway, so one of these days we went there and we heard the story of what had happened the day before. And the day before that, these two twin 8-year-olds were on the corner, and cops came out and started frisking them and accusing them of selling dope. And the mother came out to stop this, and it ended up being that the cops beat up the mother and the two twin kids. The neighborhood saw this and came running out. Now, a week before this, in a neighboring neighborhood, the cops had beat somebody bloody and rode them around in their police car for hours and let them die. So a crowd of people came out and were trying to free Rossi and her kids to take Rossi to the hospital themselves. And the police got scared of the crowd, what might have been like 200 people, and the police started shooting in the air. And if you've ever been around a gun shooting, and you weren't shooting it yourself, you probably know that the first thing in your mind is to run. And so everybody ran. And at one point, everybody turned back around and ran back and ended up fighting the police, getting Rossi Hawkins and her kids to the hospital. Two police cars ended up turned over, and the police had to run out of there on foot. And this wasn't, none of this got talked about in the news. But so we're hearing this story from a lot of people that day when we go to Double Rock about what happened the day before. And, you know, there's a lot of people, so you hear a lot of different things. But what I've said so far is what everybody agreed on that happened. And then there was one other part that everybody agreed on that happened. The time when everyone was running away from the cops, somebody started chanting, and this was the summer of 1989. The number one song on the radio, at least for us, was Public Enemy, Fight the Power. Somebody started chanting, fight the power, fight the power, fight the power. And people talked about it as immediately clicking that they were all there for a reason and that there was something that they needed to do. And it cut through any sort of explanation of a plan or deciding what their exact political idea about the situation was. It was something that united them. And they turned around and did what they had to do. And it was at that time that, you know, there was something clicked that I said, okay, there's a way to use music to help build a movement. And I'm not good at rapping, so I'm gonna have to figure it out. And I did. It made me like, I knew I wasn't good. And so the ideas that I got from being in a revolutionary organization around critique and self-critique, and around the idea of dialectical materialism, I knew that talent isn't something that, or talent is something that everyone is born with. And the fact that it shows up in some and doesn't in others has to do with opportunity and the ability to put time into it. So using that idea, I worked on it. And methodically got better at it and kept doing it and put myself in situations where I would have to learn. And but that day was the turning point. It's very clear, and I decided to do it. And then, like, I think maybe 2 years passed, and it was about to be New Year's Day on 1991. And I was like, I keep telling everybody I'm gonna make this record, make this album. And I was working at UPS at the time. Another friend of mine that was working there at UPS at the time was this guy who ended up going by the name Spice One. And he was always talking about he's making a record. And so I was like, okay, it's New Year's Eve, it's 10 o'clock, there was phone books still back then. I'm gonna go through the phone book, and whatever studio picks up the phone and says they'll open up for me tomorrow morning on New Year's Day, that's where I'm going. And so I spent my money from UPS, and this studio opened up, and I went and recorded, and made it happen then.
Oh man. Oh man, I gotta follow that up.
Tell the story with
Yeah.
the panelists.
Yeah, that was like Wolverine's origin story. And yeah, this one's gonna be like, I don't know, Havoc's or something. I don't know. I can probably pick up where you left off, because I would say Kill My Landlord and Genocide and Juice a couple years later were two of the albums that really, I was already a hip hop fan and aspiring rapper within my small circle of friends and at the cafeteria. But it was records like that, and in that time period, and in that same time period, like from 92 to 94, any hip hop heads out there know who grew up in that era know that lyricism, storytelling, talking about your life experiences, neighborhood, even smatterings of like political consciousness within those things. That was like, it was mind blowing. It was mind blowing to be 13, 14, 15 years old at that time and listening to Illmatic. And at that point, I think I remain a fan to this day, but there was a definite moment where I was starting to write my own things. At first, just like Boots, emulating what I had listened to. But at some point, it started actually mattering on a deeper level. As a Filipino kid, I couldn't relate fully, but I saw a window into what these black artists were talking about, and there were certain things that I did relate to. Being a kid who grew up in Hawaii, moved to Bremerton, Washington, hearing racist shit thrown at me and my family, and going home and listening to Ice Cube to make me feel better that day. So that then translated into writing my own things, sharing it with the people that I knew. That continued, and there were spaces where I was welcome, spaces where I wasn't. And once I started doing it in Seattle, it was folks like Gabriel Teodros who, with open arms, was like, "Yo, here's a cipher, contribute to it, let's go." As long as they welcome you, as long as you didn't come in with an ego and whatever you look like, whatever you had to say, that was it. From 90, 97, 98, 99, it was a good time to be of that age in my late teens, and seeing that now I'm seeing firsthand that there's a local, I'm listening to cats from Oakland, from LA, from New York, and I'm big fans of these, but now I'm like, wow, this is happening in my own backyard. And it's accessible. You go to one show, you go to another show the next week, the week after, and you're seeing at this time, shout out to Sam, we go to these things, we see the same, it was a tight-knit community of folks, and I didn't know whether or not, like, what my place was in it. But just the fact that you would see the same people over and over again helped. And then at the same time, organizing. So there's the parts where Boots was talking about where you translate what you learn in your organizing circles, where I was, man, I think same thing. I was very uncomfortable. I like writing. I liked trying to record, but I didn't really know like how to translate that onto the stage, like public speaking, all that stuff. But there was a space called Isama Hall, an open mic. Me and Rod were just hanging at Cafe Solstice. You know, there was an open mic there. In the late 90s, early 2000s, there was like it was just like open mic central, you know. And then outside of the open mics afterwards were like ciphers and battles.
That's all we had is all ages events too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The teen dance ordinance at the time in Seattle meant that 9 out of 10 hip hop shows were. I remember the Coup coming and it was 21 and up and I couldn't get in for a couple shows. And now that was real. So we had to find our own space and create our own spaces. And in those spaces also, because of where they were, they're in a lot of times like community theaters or coffee shops, the same places that cross sections with community organizations, activists, and folks who would be like, hey, that poetry and rap shit is cool, but you got to come to this meeting to actually learn about what you're trying to talk about in your stuff. And at first it's like, yeah, I'm good, I'm cool. But again, these communities are small. If you return and see the same people, you become friends with them. You're like, I'm gonna check out what that's about, especially if there's free food there, then I'm gonna go check that out. And then, you know, after a while, you just start translating, you know, the art and the music plays a big role in the organizing plays a big role in the art. And what once was separate worlds, you just stop seeing as separate. It's like it all encompasses the same energy and needs to if it's going to be effective.
Real talk. Man, very similar. Me and G came up in the exact same era. So, man, for me, I've told this story to lots of people before, but I take a lot of real life advice from my dreams. Anybody else do that? A couple of y'all. So I had a dream the night Pac died. It was, you know, the second time that Tupac had been shot, and a lot of us thought he was gonna make it through. Pac was like one of my favorite MCs at the time. He was just like such a full human, and he honest with every single song, even if he contradicted himself from song to song. Like, you knew that you could listen to Pac and you knew that he loved you, you know what I mean? So I had a dream, right? And I was living on Beacon Hill, I was 15 years old, and this is way before there was a light rail or anything like that. And in my dream, I knew a place away from my house to go down this staircase into this subway tunnel underneath Beacon Hill. And there was these windows in the tunnel that had pure light. And I understood this as the train to the other side. When you get to the other side, there's no coming back. And I knew that Pac was waiting for his train, but he hadn't got on the train yet. So I found Pac, I grabbed his hand, and I said, bro, you're the one that's supposed to lead us to our liberation. You're the one that's got like the ears of millions and millions of people, and you haven't even like seen your potential right now. Like, it's you. It's not your time. I know how to get to this staircase. You don't have to board your train yet. And in my dream, Pac just looks in my eyes, laughs, and says, it's on you now. I wake up, and the person that my mom was dating at the time actually busted into the room and said, Tupac just died. And I just had this voice in my head saying, it's on you now. So that was the day that I knew I was gonna take music seriously. It was gonna be a part of my life pretty much for the rest of my life. 6 months later, my family moved from Seattle to Las Vegas, Nevada. I grew up in, the city, South End, predominantly areas in Seattle that were mostly people of color. And going to Las Vegas, the west side of Las Vegas, I went to this high school called Bonanza that was like mostly white. There was about 30 to 40 students of color in a student body of 3,000. I had, kids in the like gym class that, they'd be having to change, and they had like Nazi swastika tattoos. There was a police substation in the school that I was in pretty much every other day because they were just targeting us.
The level of police harassment I experienced in Vegas was unlike anything in Seattle, and I thought it was bad in Seattle. It was so bad in Seattle, actually, that and in addition to the CD and South End gang war that was happening at the time, I didn't think I was going to live to see 18, didn't think I was going to live to see 21, didn't have plans to, because every single week it was like somebody was dying in my class at Garfield, and I would wake up wondering who died the night before. But when I went to Vegas, I realized that there was a system in place that wanted kids like me to want to die, and understanding that made me want to live more than anything else. And I can attribute a lot of that like awareness to hip hop, to the people that were in my headphones, and also to people I read because of the people in my headphones. Like books like Live from Death Row by Mumi Abu Jamal kept me alive at Bonanza. Sada Shakur, I was obsessed with the Black Panthers at that time period. So all that like led into, you know, hip hop and just political work being one and the same. I ended up going to 6 high schools in Vegas. I kept getting in fights with authority, teachers, things like that. I wouldn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Just, you know, I was a rebel. Ended up dropping out, getting a GED, saving up some money, and moving back to Seattle on my own before I was supposed to graduate. And Westlake Center used to just be the spot where it was like the MC meeting ground. And I met a lot of my original crew just freestyling in front of Westlake Center in 1999. A group emerged out of that called 500 Years. We called ourselves an artistic rebuttal to the last 5 centuries of colonization and oppression. And 1999, as y'all remember, in Seattle was also the year that the WTO protest happened. So you had this young group of radical MCs with a live band and no studio experience whatsoever in the streets doing our thing, and we just kind of got pushed into performing at rallies mostly. Those were like all of our first shows. For the first 3 years I would rap. It was because of like community organizing and activism. I never went to college. I took one acting class that I didn't make it through. That acting class did change my life, but I will say most of my education came from self-education and from community organizing and community organizations that helped grow me up through Seattle. One of the groups that most people remember me for is Abyssinian Creole. And a lot of people don't know that Abyssinian Creole is a group with myself and my brother Kings. Actually was an offshoot of an organization that's still around today called Youth Undoing Institutionalized Racism. We were 2 young people inside of YUIR that hated going to meetings. And we knew we could get through these meetings if we could make the other person laugh. But that's the origin story of that group. Like we, you know, we're rappers from the same neighborhood that have a lot of the same experience, but we would have never met each other if we weren't involved in organizing in the city. So that's kind of what it is for me.
Just to find out where it came from is beautiful. And you, Gabe, you just talked a lot about education, and so I want to know, as you know, as a teacher, more about perspectives on education that you guys have. One of the things I really appreciate about what I've heard of your lyrics on albums, you all talk about school and the education system, and don't pull any punches in terms of like the school system is set up to reproduce this world that we have today that is so disgusting, that at what we see every day going on and the injustices, part of the reason why generation after generation they do it. You know, you guys talk about how the schools are used to reproduce that. You guys call out teachers, you know, that are part complicit in that. But the other thing I love about it is you also defend teachers in terms of like they're underpaid as shit, right? And we're right now, like, we might be going on strike very soon. So people should know that the school district here in Seattle just rejected every single offer that the teachers union put forward. We had really important things that we put forward in terms of like limiting standardized testing. There's 113 standardized test kids now take from K to 12, right? It just gets rid of anything that's important in the classroom and lets Pearson and multi-billion-dollar companies decide what's taught in the room, right? So this, so on Monday, every teacher in Seattle is going to join at Benaroya Hall to discuss what are we going to do. Are we just going to take this bad contract that disrespects us, that doesn't lower class size and doesn't give the kids what they need, or are we going to stand up and fight? And what I've heard in a lot of your songs is like both a critique of the education system, but also seeing potential and like supporting teachers fighting back. And that's something that I've dedicated my life to trying to do, and would love to hear your perspectives on that struggle.
Yeah, I've been greatly influenced by my teachers in school. I mean, I have teachers that I would call teachers that weren't in the school that I went to, but and even more so, the organizations that I've been in, radical organizations, are always teachers, most of them, you know. So I have a song called "Strange Arithmetic" on the last
That's my cut.
album, and basically it's supposed to, the idea is in, you know, honoring the teachers that taught me things that they weren't supposed to in school, and also realizing, just from conversations with friends of mine that are teachers, that there are a lot of teachers that are scared to teach their students what they're supposed to be taught. You know, if you teach the curriculum that's there, you have a certain view of history that teaches you not to fight back. Yeah. And so the point of the song is that if we're not teaching kids how to fight back against the system, we're not even teaching them how to survive. We're not teaching them the real way the world works. And so we're doing them a disservice. And so that's what the last line of the song says, you know, if your school won't teach you how to fight for what's needed, they're teaching you to go through life and get cheated. So it is as important as teaching it's as important as teaching arithmetic or teaching reading, to teach people an analysis of the system that shows them where their power actually lies and how they can organize with other people to change it. Otherwise, there's no way to apply all the other things that they're taught. So, and I think because of I think that because of the need that many teachers have to help students out, it ends up being that many teachers, at least that I've run into, and maybe it's just, but are at the very least to the left of center, you know. And I'm sure there's areas where that's not the case. Definitely I had teachers that were pretty right wing. But a lot of, and you know, I went to school in Oakland, California. Only when I was in high school, I didn't think about it as a short time, but only 10 years, less than 10 years maybe, after the Black Panther Party had dissolved. None of us in our high school knew who the Black Panther Party was. This is mainly, it was like 60% black, you know, 30% Asian, 10% Chicano, and, you know, less than 1% white. And we didn't know, to the point where I at one point got attacked by the principal over the loudspeakers, saying, nobody listened to Raymond Riley, he's a communist, and he wants to bring us back to the days of the Black Panther Party. So everybody in the classes were like, raised, what's the Black Panther Party? Right? And because this is, I mean, later on we found out, most people in Oakland found out who the Black Panther Party was from Public Enemy. But I'm talking about my age range. But the teachers, many of them answered that the Black Panther Party was a black version of the Ku Klux Klan. And so that was the rumor around the school. And this is even with, there was a girl in my class named Erica, and she was like, oh yeah, I know I was named after one of the Black Panthers. But the thing is that, you know, there's a few things to notice in that story, and one of them is where, you know, all those Panthers still lived in Oakland. And it's telling about the makeup of the party that they had, that even if that group didn't exist anymore, that those politics weren't being put out at the time in the same way. So, you know, but the point is that, so even in Oakland, and then it comes to find, later on I found out that one of my teachers was, you know, considered this, or two of them considered themselves socialists. Like later on I found that, I'm like, wow, I had no idea from being in your classroom that those were your politics. And I don't know if it's the same up here, but in California, there's the law that you cannot say anything neutral about communism. You cannot put out an analysis that leads people to think that we shouldn't have capitalism.
I'd be in trouble.
Yeah. And I know there are people now in California that don't adhere to that law, but it is there still. And people were following it even more. They often would, in the 80s, there would be one teacher in trouble for advocating revolution in their class. And of course, because they were advocating revolution, the students came around them and, you know, rallied around them. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that the other ways that I deal with education in my, you know, while I was in high school, I know that we would always be told this phrase, education is the key. And what they meant by education was a degree, right? And what they meant by the key was that you'd have a job if you graduate. That's what they mean. That's what they're saying. Like, you want to survive, get a degree. And obviously that's not really the full analysis of how it all works, right? And but so in doing that, a lot of educators, especially you know, folks that are in administration, would put out this idea that there's all this trouble going on in communities of color. You know, people are selling dope, people are killing each other, people are going to prison, and that the answer to it all is folks going to college. Which what that actually implies is that unemployment comes from people's bad choices. It implies that poverty comes from people's bad choices. But most economists, whether they're on the right or the left, understand that capitalism needs a certain amount of unemployed people to operate. It cannot exist on full employment. If there's full employment, then you can't threaten to fire people, right? Wages go up. You know, in things like the Wall Street Journal, they openly worry about the unemployment rate going down, right? And so we know that if there has to be a certain amount of unemployed people, that also those certain amount of unemployed people have to eat. And if they have to eat, that means they're going to have to get involved in some other business that doesn't have to do with a 9-to-5 job necessarily. And that's the illegal economy. And the illegal economy, illegal business, just like legal business, must have violence. Legal business has to have violence. Like, somebody can't come into this store with a shopping cart and just take a whole bunch of books and walk out, because either the security here is going to stop them or the police are going to stop them. There's a violent force. There's a physical force that stops them. And physical force is what regulates legal business. You have the police to regulate legal business. Illegal business doesn't have the police to regulate for them. They do it themselves. Right? They have to do it themselves. You have to regulate. Otherwise, you can't exist as a business. You can't go to court and say, Your Honor, I was supposed to get a whole key of cocaine. This is clearly 80% baking soda. I demand reparations or restitution. You can't, there's zoning commissions. Like, if some other business builds into this wall, they get served with a lawsuit saying don't do that, and the only person to enforce it is the police. There's a physical, even if it doesn't come to that, there's a physical force behind laws and regulations that exist. Illegal business doesn't have that. They can't go to the zoning commission and say there should only be 2 dope dealers on this block and not 3. So that is where the violence comes in, right? That's where that's part of business, right? And they have to do it themselves, and ends up being a culture around that violence. Anytime you have a certain kind of business or a way of doing business, a culture has to grow around that in order for it to work, right? Fishing villages create fishing songs, right? You try to teach a fishing village agricultural songs, they might find it catchy, but it's not going to change whether they're fishing or not. And it's also going to not be as popular as the fishing songs. And so this comes from class analysis. This is like something simple that folks that understand that there's a class analysis understands. But a lot of us with those analyses get jobs at nonprofit organizations who have a different mission statement. And their mission statement is not to put out a line that says this whole system has to change. Their mission statement is to put out a line that says the system works, people just haven't figured out how to live inside it. So we end up having a lot of radicals or would-be radicals that work for nonprofit organizations saying, we're going to stop the violence and stop the poverty in this community by having classes on how to talk to each other nicer. We're going to have a seminar on the right tie to wear to a job interview. We're going to, we're going to teach people this skill, right? The problem is this community doesn't have the skills, right? And the truth is, yeah, you can shift stuff around. There's, you're unemployed and you have a job, and then instead I could teach you a better skill than this guy, but then he's out of a job. So it doesn't really solve anything, but you're saying to a group of people, okay, this is crabs in a barrel, let me teach you how to be a stronger crab. And it's not talking about solving the problem. So part of that whole idea, though, is, you have educators that are sitting in communities of color with this idea that the system works. And the problem are the students, and we could teach them a way to survive in this system that doesn't have to do with changing the system. right? And so part of that line is get your degree, right? Not telling them that, you know, I went to San Francisco State, I didn't graduate, but the people I did graduate with, they don't have jobs that they need a degree for, if they have a job, right? And that's the real truth about it. And then some people would say, well, if you teach them that, then you're not giving them any hope. But there is hope in getting rid of this system, right? And, you know, so one line about that I say is if everybody in the hood had a PhD, you'd say that doctor flipped that burger hella good for me. And, you know, here's the thing that we should be teaching people about education. Is that we need education because it's a right to know shit. Right? It's a pleasure to be able to know what the world is about. It helps you understand the world. And not like the, you know, education improves your status in the world. And you know, and it ends up serving, you know, that whole line ends up serving an opposite purpose. Because I know for me and my friends, you know, they'd be like, you know, you guys are behind. You know, the students in Japan, they go to school on Saturday and half a Sunday. And, you know, and if you, and look at UC Berkeley, you know, they're not letting people in that have A- grade point averages. So if you don't even have a B grade point average, you're not going to college. So it'd be like, okay, guess we're not going to college. You know, like this is, it doesn't work. But so some of what ends up being pushed around education is not education to make yourself a better person in the sense of what you know about the world, or to learn about things you want to learn about, or to have a more fulfilling life, to have conversations about things you normally wouldn't know about. It's, you could get a job in a better office if you go get this kind of education. And then that's not even necessarily true for everybody. Obviously, some people have jobs, so that exists. But it's put out there as the answer to what's going on. And so a lot of time I talk about that. And I think that teachers, especially nowadays, are doing an excellent job at putting forward radical viewpoints in certain situations, like the Chicago teacher strike. You know, what you guys are involved with, and teachers have helped shape my life in many ways, and it hasn't necessarily been through the textbook lessons that they were supposed to give me. And so that's kind of like what that song is about, is like, how do you touch the students even more? You know, so.
Let me just ask one more question, and you guys can hit a couple things as we go here, because we're running short on time, and I want to give people time to get their books signed, and wind it down. So touch on the education piece too, but also in terms of what we need for a social struggle that will transform our society. And so right after Darren Wilson wasn't indicted, there was a mass walkout at Garfield High School, like 1,000 students streaming into the streets. You know, they doubled the size of the rally that was being held. And then the amazing thing is, like, even Roosevelt High School, majority, almost all white, right? They had a mass walkout, and several other schools around Seattle too. And I remember KL Shannon, a great organizer, activist in the city, she came to me and she said, Jesse, is this it? And what she meant was like, look how many movements we've seen come up and disappear, whether it's the anti-war movement, the Occupy, you know. And she was like, is this the one? Like, are we now, like, is Black Lives Matter becoming the new social struggle that's going to catapult us into mass struggle that's happening around the country? Are we at a moment where victories are going to build on each other? And so I'd like to know both about like the role of schooling and education, and also like what's the goal of our movement, where are we going, and the strategies to build social struggle, to get rid of the horrific police violence we're seeing, the deep, this country built on institutional racism and capitalism, and how are we going to build movements that challenge that? So.
Okay. That's such a big question. Man, so I have more questions than I have answers when it comes to that question, like what we need. I'm more interested in creating the systems that will replace the system that's in place right now. Looking at my family's history, my family's from Ethiopia. In my mother's lifetime, there had been 2 successful revolutions where the people overthrew the person that was in power, and the system that replaced the one that came before it in a lot of ways was the worse, you know? So I'm very interested in focusing more attention and energy on creating the things that we do want, in addition to tearing down what's here because it's completely broken and not working. But if we get rid of police, how do we keep our community safe? I'm interested in building those strategies. How do we feed each other? How do we, you know, I like to put a lot more of my energy into that because it's so easy to protest every single time. I'm not saying it's completely easy, it's necessary, but I don't think it's everything by itself, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm just trying to figure it out every day. Yeah.
Man, same here. Same thing. I'm trying to figure it out every day. I will say though that we're no longer the young people at these events, at these protests.
Crazy, right?
So there's a little bit of a perspective, I guess, where I still feel a connection to the young people who are speaking out, but a perspective where I've been around just a little bit long enough to know and see that there are more young people in the streets than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and that excites me. It seems like the flow of information, whether it's through technology or word of mouth, or through people in institutions such as schools who are heightening the consciousness and critical thinking, such as yourself, amongst and harnessing that energy that's already there, and just giving it a space for that energy for people to converse with each other and have them figure out what to do with that energy. I'm seeing more of that than I saw in my lifetime earlier when I was younger. So I don't know, maybe there's just a general sense of optimism amongst the pessimism I have a eternal pessimism about the system itself. It's broken. Or no, I shouldn't say that. It is working perfectly for those in power. But it's broken for the rest of us. But I think I have an optimism that I didn't have when I was younger, with seeing the generation, my kids' generation coming up and sharing information with each other faster than we ever did, knowing what to do with whatever energy that they feel and injustices that they see. Whereas I think we all looked at each other, 70s babies, 80s babies, were like, so what do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah.
And it took a while to figure out, unless you happen to come across an organizer, which were harder to come by than I feel like it is now, at least in cities like Seattle. So maybe it's not the case in other places, but I'm speaking to people here. So, yeah, up and down the West Coast, we're lucky to be in places where we can have these conversations, and we should run with it. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what happens from here on out. But yeah, spaces need to happen. I know for certain solidarity, more of that needs to happen. It's been interesting too, being a non-black person of color who raps, who gets asked a lot about what do I think about what's going on with police brutality and the movements and the Black Lives Matter and everything. And there's nothing that I can say that I haven't said either in a previous conversation or in a song that'd be different than what I've already said. But we need to listen to the actual voices out there, the young voices, the young black men and women who are in the streets, who are actually putting this forward. And so the most I can do is step back and amplify that, still do my thing, still put out my music, still make the food that I make. But I know my role is to support those actions and those voices as much as I can, and pass the microphone on.
Yeah, but so just to tell us more about what this movement needs to do to develop and challenge, what are some of the obstacles too that this Black Lives Matter movement faces? We just had this incident here in Seattle with Black Lives Matter movement challenging Bernie Sanders, and like what you think of that and where we need to go as a movement.
So I think that one of the things that happens with many movements and many campaigns, and the reason they die out, one of the reasons has to do with burnout, right? And what does that mean, though, burnout? Like, people get tired of it. They don't they're not going and taking a nap. What does it mean? People come to a point where they don't think that the movement can do anything, right? And they're like, I'm spending all my time with this thing, but does it have any power to actually change things? And that's the big question. That's the thing that makes people drop out of organizations and parties and things like that. And I think, so I have this thing that I always go on, and kind of the condensed version is, in the 20s and 30s in the US, there was a mass militant labor movement in the US. And you had sit-in strikes in the Midwest. You had places like Utah, Montana, Alabama, Colorado, with militant fights, militant strikes. And by militant, I mean, in Alabama, the miners were shooting it out with corporate thugs. You had stuff going on in Colorado. You had, during the 20s and 30s, it was estimated that there was 1 million card-carrying members of the Communist Party, right? At the same time, there's revolutions going on all over the world. You had a similar somewhat unrelated thing called the Bonus March, where all these veterans marched to the White House, some of them carrying guns. It ended up having to be met with tanks. At that time, a lot of the population was radicalized, right? And supporting this. Why? Because they saw the leverage that could be had if you shut down an industry, right? Because we all know, even if people aren't radicalized, they know how the system works, at least to the extent that money runs the show, right? So when a way of working that said, okay, to get what we want, we're gonna stop profit, people rallied around that. And not because of some theoretical, I mean, obviously there's a lot of theory around it and people want to feel empowered, but it wasn't only because of that. It was because it seemed viable, seemed like something that could work. Shortly, from that ended up coming the New Deal and things like that. So even the thing that the center left puts as the big success of electoral movements really came because the ruling class was scared of revolution that seemed viable and possible to grow a lot more. Obviously, right then wasn't going to be a revolution, but it was growing. Another, just on a side note, answer to that was the Rockefeller saying we better start foundations that limit what this politic is going to be. But after that period, the Communist Party decided to go underground and say, look, there's a fight against fascism. We're gonna not get in the US's way of getting rid of Hitler. And that kind of came down from the Comintern because Soviets were fighting the Nazis, and there was a united front against fascism. So all of a sudden, all these radicals who, when they were organizing all these other strikes and being part of it, people were saying, this isn't just a strike for wages, this is a strike for wages. We're gonna fight militantly, but this is part of a revolutionary movement. And people were around them. People went, the radicals and revolutionaries went underground. In preparation for and during World War II, in preparation for the U.S., with the idea that they weren't going to challenge the U.S. while they were fighting Hitler, so that Hitler could be smashed. This led the way for when the McCarthy era came around, and they were able to say, look, your friend at work that you've known for 15 years and hasn't been telling you is a revolutionary is right there. He's been lying to you. And so that made those witch hunt trials a lot easier because that stance had already been taken. I'm very much oversimplifying things, but there's a through line with this. And during that same time, there was the revelations about Stalin, and all of those things made the biggest revolutionary organization that the U.S. had ever seen break up into a lot of small groups. Those small groups became the beginning of the New Left in the United States. The New Left in the United States ended up taking a different route. One of the good things that it did was, it's in the 60s they were saying, fuck that, we're revolutionaries. We're open and out with what we're doing. The other thing it did was it moved away from the labor organizing. It moved away from places like Montana and Utah, moved to cities, and moved to organize students. And they started putting out the line that the students are the revolution. And it really wasn't a historical precedence to that. There was a contemporary thing going on with the Cultural Revolution in China that may have influenced that as well, but where that was led by students. But this was something new. And it meant that the left was leaving behind certain kinds of struggles that people were dealing with anyway, which is, how am I going to put food on the table? And when I say the left, obviously there were still people doing that, and that was the unions, which were now pretty liberal and had kicked out all the radicals. And the radicals had left it alone as well. Like, no, they weren't, for the most part, fighting to be part of that. But focusing on students and other, made spectacle a lot more important. See, we call these things demonstrations, right? Why are they demonstrations? Well, they used to demonstrate the power that we had to shut down industry. It used to be like, this is a demonstration. It's a bunch of people on the street. It's only a demonstration. It's not the actual thing that we're gonna do. It's just the threat. But then with spectacle becoming center stage, it was the thing. That was it. Get people into the streets. And it made it seem like what you have to do is let your voice be heard. I've heard that a lot. Let your voice be heard. That's an important part of it. But what we put forward when we say that is that all you have to do is get in the street, and then we'll shame power into doing stuff for us, right? They see a bunch of people in the street. They feel bad about what they're doing. They don't want to be embarrassed with their friends that, there's 100,000 people in the street, and, so now we're going to do something. The other thing it does is imply that it centers it all around electoral politics, in the sense that, okay, hopefully what this means is that the elected officials feel like we got a lot of people out here. I might not get voted back in if I don't do what they say. So far, that hasn't worked, right? But, I mean, you think about it like this. Like, we put a lot on spectacle, and part of that is because of an incorrect telling of history, right? Spectacle is important, but you have to have a way to shut down industry and stop profit from being made in order to even affect small changes. A lot of what we look at is the civil rights movement. But think about it like this. Biggest action of the civil rights movement, March on Washington. So on TV, TV meant a lot more then. There was no internet, not even any cable stations. A lot of places only had 1 or 2 channels at that time. It was on TV all the time. The fact that there was going to be a March on Washington. There's a civil rights movement. It's all over the place. Only game in town for some people. 200,000 people. Only 200,000 people at that time. That demonstration didn't make what happened happen. In my mind, it was kind of like professional wrestling, right? There's a change that needs to happen so that this movement doesn't get more radical. And let's say that it was this. It was, definitely it was and then we see when King got more radical and said, okay, we need to start having general strikes. That's when he got killed, right? So the focus on spectacle, not only is it not that it just doesn't work, but people don't join it because a lot of the time, if you're an organizer, you've run into this, like all those marches, what is it going to do? And we don't really have an answer for that. We really don't. Like, what is it going to do? And I've been involved in a lot of police brutality campaigns through the years, and kind of figured out certain answers to that. But the truth is, we don't know. And the reason that we don't know is because we are not showing people where the crux of their power is. And the crux of their power is that this is a system that relies on exploitation. The folks that are making the wealth are the ones who control the legislators. They're the ones, it's not the voters that control the legislators. It doesn't matter what the folks say in their campaign that they're gonna do. They're not gonna do it if the ruling class doesn't want them to do it. There might be a little bit of leeway, inching this way or that way, but when we talk about the great gains that have been made, none of them have been made by electing the right person into office. Right? The New Deal didn't come because people were like, oh, we got to get Delano Roosevelt in there. It came because, like I said, there were massive strikes and stuff going on all over the place. Affirmative action came in under Nixon. Not because he just had one part of him that was progressive and the rest of them was fascist. It came because he had to, because there was a growing movement happening and they didn't want to see it get more radical. You can make any politician do whatever you want them to do if you can affect the profits of the ruling class. There's a great documentary on YouTube called Breaking the Foundations. And it's about the Building Labor Federation in Sydney, Australia. And it's kind of a history of them from the 40s to the 80s. And basically, in the 60s, they were a militant union. Not necessarily radical, had radicals in it, but they were militant. They would have these strikes. They were all big dudes. They would keep the scabs out. And what's more, they'd go to the scabs' houses and beat them up. So that there was no way for them to have replacement workers. The boss had to deal with them. The thing was shut down. It's not going to happen. Then they were like, how do we make this more radical? And then there were community groups that said, look, there's gentrification going on over here. People are getting kicked out because they're building these high rises. So they said, okay, in this area and that area, nobody's building there, right? So they got tremendous support from the community. Then other things would happen in other cities. Somebody would have a labor struggle or something going on with this particular company. And if that particular company was building in Sydney, they'd shut the building down. That building is not getting made until you deal with that thing in that other city. That's a different idea. That's not just a trade union movement. It's a radical militant labor movement. There are other problems. They got to a certain point and developers started disappearing people. And that didn't stop them. They kept doing other stuff. But the thing is this, whatever movement we have, whatever demand we have to look at where our actual power is to affect the change around that. Right. And if the Black Lives Matter movement is going to grow, it's going to be because people see it as as having a viable way of changing the situation, right? Some of us, artists, we feel like saying what we're saying, yelling at the stars is enough. But the average everyday person doesn't feel that way, right? They want, if I'm gonna spend my time, I wanna know if it can work, right? It's not that the average everyday person, even people of color, nobody's sitting around being like, I kind of like police brutality. That's not why they're not showing out. They're not showing up if they don't think it could work. Occupy Oakland, we had 50,000 people show up for this general strike that we called with only 1 week out. And I really think that it's because people saw that just that idea was something viable of shutting down profit. And there was a lot of critique going back and forth about there weren't, that it wasn't a black movement, it wasn't a movement for people of color. But again, I had been involved in organizing in the Bay Area for 20 years before that. And it was the most black folks I had seen at even when organizations were all black, right? Because people were, one reason that people don't get involved in stuff is they're like, I gotta pay my bills. And we're not tying these things. That's the main thing people are worried about. In white communities, black communities, whatever, they're worried about paying their bills. And this other stuff is a problem that happens while people are trying to survive. Right? So the key to getting people involved is making them feel like there's a place of power, a point. What's the leverage point? And the reason that we haven't been doing that is because the left has been running away from the class struggle for the last 40 years. So we want to make these movements bigger, make them have the ability to win. And to make them have the ability to win, we got to tie them with wage struggles. Yeah. So one thing that could immediately be done is the Black Lives Matter movement could tie in with the Fight for 15. There you go. Right? That's just one idea, whatever. But there could be other things going on. But and I don't mean the legislative Fight for 15. I think that you know, electoral struggles end when people go to the ballot box, right? There's no more movement in there. You know, you saw the first anti-war movement get torn down by the Kerry movement.
That's right.
Right? Then there was another anti-war movement that built up, got torn down again by the Obama election. And, you know, people in my family were really like hyped and part of the grassroots organizing of the Obama campaign. And they were like, we're building this network. And really, there was a network, right? But the whole point is you're selling people. It takes a lot of energy to get somebody elected. And you're selling people, in order to do that, you're selling people that this is a game changer, right? So you told people that this is a game changer. We get this person in the office. That's why you got to do all this work. That's why it's important for you to come out. And we're not really telling them the truth. We're not really telling them the truth, even if you think that's part of the plan. If you tell them that this is only part of the plan, it's really a lot harder to get them to the ballot box. This is just one of 6 parts of the plan. That doesn't get people to the ballot box. So good people, distort the truth and say, we have to do this. This is the thing that's going to change it all. So that means as soon as they go to the ballot box, they're not in that movement anymore. And there's no movement left. And and again, this is a development that's only happened since the 60s, which is a long time ago, but it wasn't like that beforehand. The idea of radicals having to be involved in electoral movements in order to make change is something new, and it's a result of everything being based on spectacle. You know, obviously not everything. And what I said, like I said, it's a general idea of what's happened. There was a Detroit Revolutionary Union movement. There were a lot of examples that were not, that don't fit into, but they were not the main wave of what people were doing. And so, you know, that's basically what we got to do is be involved in class struggle, even around issues of racism, because otherwise, after Mike Brown, if St. Louis had shut down, if there was no industry happening, there wouldn't even have waited for a grand jury.
Yeah.
Right? He would have been under the jail already. Whatever needs to be done to get the profits moving again. Not that it's that easy, obviously. And what that means is that's some place that the left is not at right now. That means that we have to work around these other issues and build it to that point. And also, while we're building other things that aren't there.
Yeah. And we really got to wind down. So real quick.
That was dope. You gave me so many ideas. You reminded me of 2 things I wanted to say that I forgot earlier. One, I think a big difference between now and like generations before us is the introduction of like the nonprofit, and that being like the model that people go to. I think that pacified our generation more than anything else, because it creates a system and organizations where you're accountable to funders instead of people. And I think we need to stop like going towards nonprofits as a way to organize, period. And the other one is just an idea that I've been saying like a broken record since last year, but I think it just needs to be repeated. Anti-black racism is very profitable, period. So finding ways to, and I say that because of the prison industrial complex, and much like in apartheid in South Africa, in situations with Palestine right now, I think another idea for the Black Lives Matter movement is if we had a national and worldwide boycott, divest, and sanction movement against private prisons and corporations that make money off of black bodies, that would be huge. So that's all.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much.